Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Growth in E-commerce stage here at DEPT Commerce Day. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Diana Gordon. I'm SVP of E-commerce and Marketplace Strategy here at DEPT, and I'm joining you from Chicago, Illinois. As you probably know by now, at DEPT Commerce Day, we have a wide range of interesting talks, panels, and experts lined up for you on a total of 3 separate stages. Right now, you're in the Growth in E-commerce stage. So if you want to go back to the main stage, simply click on the desktop and refresh the interface. Make sure to explore the rest of the icons too. There's a lot to see and do today. On this stage here, the talks and panel will cover the topic of growth, and we'll be getting learnings and insights from leading brand experts. If you have any questions for them, please drop them here in the chat. And if we don't have time for all questions during the session, we'll connect with you on LinkedIn afterward to get your question answered. That's it for now. Let's go to the first panel for today. For that first panel, we have a topic of future-proof your e-commerce to scale your business. We have experts from 2 of today's leading consumer brands who are driving change within their respective categories based on the new and next trends in consumer shopping. We also have with us one of my colleagues here at DEPT who will share how we advise our clients on the innovations required to stay ahead and lead in e-commerce. We have a lot of ground to cover today and only a short bit, so let's get into it. Patrik, David, Kevin, can you please introduce yourself to the group?
Yes, I can go first. I'm Patrik Bälter. I'm joining you from Stockholm in Sweden. I'm working within the digital marketing and e-commerce space at a company called Electrolux. And my work is primarily focused on how we can help consumers find, discover, and buy our products on the e-commerce platforms such as Amazon and the likes, and on our own branded websites. So yeah, happy to be here and excited to chat with you about these topics.
David, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm David. I'm the head of search over at Reckitt. I'm based in the Netherlands. So I'm in charge of both paid and organic for around about 700 websites across about 65 brands globally.
And Kevin, that just leaves you.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Good to see you. My name is Kevin. I am responsible for over marketplace strategy at DEPT here from the Netherlands. I'm located in Rotterdam today. And I've been in e-commerce and performance marketing for the better part of 14 years now. So trying to find that balance between e-commerce and marketing.
Amazing. Great. So my first question is actually for all 3 of you. So e-commerce can be a nebulous term, meaning something different depending on who you're talking with and what their role is at their particular organization, or where they work, what type of business it is. From your vantage point, how do you define e-commerce? What does it entail? What doesn't it entail? And why do you think that? Patrik, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, from where I see it, what I do, it's really kind of everything in that way. For me, it's everything that happens when consumers are buying and shopping products on the platforms, or all the way to when we sell direct to consumers. And I think that's really interesting because it's one term. We talk about e-commerce, but I think it entails a lot of different skill sets and capabilities and challenges for the organization, and they are vastly different. Sometimes similar, and from the consumer's point of view, they're just milliseconds apart. But I think there can also be very big differences.
Absolutely. David, how about you? How do you define e-commerce?
So I think it very much depends on digital maturity of the business. So if you're e-commerce first business, then everything is e-commerce to you, versus your traditional brick and mortar site. You might just have maybe an affiliate partnership, or you might have a dedicated store, you might have a dedicated app. So I very much think e-commerce is linked to where you sit in the digital maturity scale. But again, from a consumer's point of view, consumers, I don't think, break it out as much as we do internally. If I'm going to buy from Amazon or Tesco's or Walmart or Albert Heijn or Carrefour, as a consumer, I don't mind. I'll buy from whichever channel, but I don't think about it differently. And I know we talked previously when we had the introductory session on this, there's still a number of businesses that draw a line in the sand. So if you buy through their online business, you can't return in store. And even there can be the situation of they can't even pull up your sales records because they're offline and online hasn't been connected. So yeah, so again, I think where it is in terms of digital maturity, yeah, that's my kind of line in the sand, that consumers think about e-commerce as everything digital, which Patrik said, but as a business, I still think we probably put a bit too much complexity around it.
Kevin, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much on par here with David, and might even take it a step further, that e-commerce for me is anything or any way we have to influence consumer behavior, which in a digital way, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're doing that offline or during offline shopping in an app, for example, or you do that with the most beautiful fashion website where you do live shopping, everything where we are influencing consumer behavior in a digital way to make them buy stuff, for me is e-commerce.
Yeah, definitely. My next question is actually for Patrik and for David. So you each work for brands that have traditionally had a primarily brick and mortar sales model. How are your organizations approaching the rise of e-commerce? What are some of the steps that you're taking to bring this new selling model into your mix? David, we can start with you.
Obviously, I'm not in charge of Amazon, so put a caveat there, but it's very much where I've worked in the past. We've looked into how we can optimize some of those digital shelves. So it's about making sure your retailers have the correct packages. There's various online DAM platforms that can help them optimize that. Make sure they have the correct SKU details, make sure they have up-to-date descriptions, correct ingredients. So I think it's about ensuring your retail partners have all the information they need and all the images they need. I think that's a key part to kind of improve that relationship, because you do see with some retailers, they use old pack shots, it's not always consistent with new branding, versus other retailers, they're very proactive. They'll actually go out and create their own images. So I think it very much, as a retail partner, you need to be helping them ensure they have the correct and accurate details to get the most out of the consumers and increase the conversion rates.
Yeah. Patrik, what are you guys doing at Electrolux with respect to your retail partnerships and sort of making that move to e-commerce?
Yeah. I mean, first for us, it is, these are new channels not new this year, but since over the last 10 years, because we have been very, focused on the offline retail. And I think one piece is still the same and one is very different. So for us, for example, moving into e-commerce platforms like Amazon, we found ourselves with a big gap in capabilities, how to execute marketing really well on these platforms, because we had very strong capabilities in marketing traditionally to reach the consumer and drive demand, and then this becomes a new set of skills, I would say. How do you really execute that business, that marketing execution from a day-to-day, and do that way much more self-service than traditional retail relationships. And on the other side of this coin, I would say nothing has changed, because the consumer is buying our products, and it doesn't really matter where they buy them. If you look at it from a usage perspective, you might buy a new kitchen that you have for 20 years. And over that long relationship we have with them as a brand, the purchase is just a quick instance. And I think it's really interesting for us to see how do we connect with the consumer over that lifetime, independent of where they actually make the transaction.
Yeah, I see. You each talked about sort of new capabilities and new skills that the organization needed to build, new muscles, in order to transition from that brick and mortar to an e-commerce space. What are some of the ways that your organizations are developing those skills? What have you found works?
I can start there, and I think to pick up the point that I made around Amazon and more self-service and executing content and campaigns on platforms like Amazon, we actually developed a quite substantial learning program together with one of the agencies in the DEPT network, Factor A, which we found really useful, because we just needed to fast forward that learning quickly to get everyone on the same page. And sometimes we find that it's overwhelming to execute this in-house, so to say, and sometimes we find that we can really do it. And I think another part in this for us is not directly linked to the transaction or the e-commerce side of it, but how do we get the products connected with consumers, which might happen through an app, for example.
So I think it's about, I guess, empowering the organization with dedicated teams, personnel to focus on some of these parts of the business, similar to what you have with the traditional retail partners. But I think also one thing that can help, and again, is things which I've done in my prior role, is work very closely with e-commerce teams to build playbooks, optimization strategies, working with your agency partners to run audits to identify, because sometimes there'll be things which will be missed. There'll be often big opportunities, such as, optimizing your Amazon SKUs can lead to a massive uplift in the amount of views you get and potential conversions. But yeah, so I think the key thing is working closely with retail partners, using any attribution toolkits they provide, such as tracking links. So you can get better insight in terms of the quality of traffic you're sending them, and they can get better insights in terms of the amount of clicks you're sending them and the quality of those clicks. So that's what I've seen has helped a lot.
Got it. Thanks. Kevin, my next question's for you. So you lead marketplace strategy here at DEPT. How are brands seeing the role of marketplaces? We talked for a minute there, David and Patrik, both about Amazon, right? They're the biggest marketplace. How are brands using marketplaces in expanding their e-commerce strategies? Are these strategies one size fits most, or is it something else?
Well, I think we can't get around the elephant in the room, right? Amazon is so large, so powerful when it comes to the e-commerce space in so many markets. You kind of need them in the mix in most cases. But I think we're at a crossroads in time, which is it's a bit like the paradigm shift we had when Facebook started offering advertising and you could get access to their data back in the day, and it was like shooting fish in a barrel to get sales on the platform. There's so many niche marketplaces rising up. There's so many retailers opening up their data to be shared or to be used in campaigning. Basically, what we're running into is a situation where you need to be present on so many different platforms if you want to really dominate your market segment. So what I really feel is that there's no one size fits all or one size fits most strategy where you can say, okay, these are the top 10 you need to include, but really looking at your segment in the market, which niche players and local heroes are present, and then start using them. And I think that the most important bit here is that you shouldn't see them as only marketplaces. You should really start looking at them as alternate search engines to, well, what we mostly use, Google, because in the end they are product search engines. And if you start looking at them in that way, you see them as marketing channels and not as these bohemian or really big hurdles that you need to take when looking from the retail side of things, but really see them as marketing opportunities where you can reach more consumers that are in your niche, ready to be influenced, if you will.
I love that, thinking of marketplaces as alternative search engines. With that in mind, David, you're a resident search expert in the room. How have you changed your search strategies to accommodate and adapt to the growing world of marketplaces and such alternative search engines?
So I think it's the fact that marketplaces always have to get more support from brands, ensuring the products are best optimized for the best experience. As I said, the right sized images, the right resolution, the right ad copy, even potential unique ad copy, product copy. So I think they're generally on board with getting some type of guidance and support to make sure the right products show in the right situation to get the best conversion rate. I definitely think they are another search platform, but in a lot of markets, there's still very much a fuzzy aspect around it in terms of a lot of the traditional search tools don't have any insight. And even some of the retail platforms, don't always have automated analytics. It's sometimes manual exports. So I think they do have a huge potential for us to further grow. But again, there's probably some catch up in terms of, as I said, even Amazon, for example, there's a lot of stuff that's available within the Amazon interface that's not available through an API. Or there's a lot of information that's available in Amazon by emails, but not available through bulk export. So yeah, so I think one thing is it would help supercharge that move is better data from some of these retail partners and available through API feeds.
Couldn't agree more.
Kevin, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just said I couldn't agree more with what David said. We really need more insights and analytics to accelerate those platforms. But then again, that's also an opportunity because in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, or what's the expression again? Knowing what's happening roughly on a platform like that, because you're on a platform, gives you a head start on others that aren't making that decision without the information.
That couldn't be more true. That's actually a really great segue to my next question, which, Patrik, is for you. So large size appliances have a very different purchase cycle and life cycle, as you mentioned, than, say, personal care brands like those that David oversees. So how is Electrolux thinking about the role of first-party data in fostering relationships with customers? And then what role are retailers playing in the future if brands start to own more of that communication and experience?
Yeah, we see that as fundamental, not purely to stitch all the data together and understand what's happening, but to be able to be close enough to the consumer to help them and to give the right support at the right time. Like I mentioned, if you think about it, if we sell a product to someone and we commit to a relationship over 15 years, the more we can know of who that person is from get-go, the better we can, provide improvements of the product over the product's lifetime. I think we will see a shift towards software being a bigger part of the product experience, something that we can influence, upgrade, adopt for consumers over time. And I think there we have an opportunity how we connect the products, and I think our industry still haven't maybe figured out all of the relevant use cases for that. I think we can see some hardware categories where the connected use case is super strong, and I think more and more this is evolving, and more categories, and we are among those categories, I think, where we will only see stronger and stronger use case for app connected appliances, for example. And sorry, Mav, I don't know if I answered the question fully, but I think that's the holy grail for us with first party data, is how that's connected all the way. But then, of course, we want to be able to understand first party data also when we have less and less visibility on who the consumer is.
Yeah, David, go ahead, please chime in.
So yeah, I thought I'd try the functionality of Zoom. So I think the other factor is, as brands, we also need to make sure, while we've access for first-party data, all those sort of things, we need to sometimes make sure we're not creepy. So again, the fact that, I know you've opened your dishwasher and you finished the cycle, you don't want a message to say, go buy some finished dishwasher products. I think at some point in the future, there is opportunity for those connected devices, but you need to very much focus on making sure you're respecting the consumer's privacy, because once they say, particularly on the GDPR laws, once they say, don't talk to me, you've cut off that relationship. And again, if you're Electrolux and you're only talking to that consumer every 5, 10, 15 years, you don't want to ruin that thing. So I think the biggest thing around the first party data is, you need to think about brand ethics, which I think as a business, we're very much moving forward at a rapid pace compared to what I've seen a lot of other businesses. But I think the thing which I sort of talk about, particularly around search, is we don't be creepy when it comes to remarketing. So I think ethics is becoming more important. And again, it's a retention thing. There's a lot of people in our team who have a deep respect for consumer privacy, and that's what, you know, they're helping drive the organization forward in the right way. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of support from a lot of people in the digital space to realize that there's a lot of brands who probably went a bit too far. But you know, some of the remarketing tools out there, you know, you add something to your cart, there's got a pop-up, another window saying, do you want a discount on that? So I think it's very much kind of bring it back to something where the consumers will ideally benefit because things will be much more tailored to them. But yeah, you don't want to be that creepy company.
I completely agree. That's it's super high on the agenda, and I think every time we talk about things like this, I think that's actually coming higher up than anyone could even imagine. Like that's with that very careful approach to it, and being you know, better safe than sorry in all of those instances, so that you really want to be on the consumer side in that. And I agree. I think for sure not being creepy, and for sure respecting and have a sustainable approach to how we treat consumer data overall, and a high level of respect for that and integrity, but also not inventing useless use cases. I think it's important, because I think that's interesting in all industries. Sometimes it's when you see these really great use cases on a car app or on, you know, any products, it's amazing, but many of them are not completely useful.
Yeah, that's interesting to talk about. I wanted to go back to something David said earlier about sort of the nascent nature of some of these e-commerce platforms, and the ability to get data out of them or share data with them. We talk a lot about the emergence and the rise of walled gardens. And now with e-commerce, and as Kevin, you said, more and more brands starting to license the data that they have on their shoppers, what we're starting to see is a proliferation of those walled gardens, making it, to Patrick's earlier point, harder to stitch together. What is that data story? What is that data strategy? Do you have any advice for brands on how to harness the walled garden space in a way that still unlocks that very valuable, rich insight, but allows us to, as David and Patrick have advocated for, not be creepy?
Is that a question to me?
Sure, David, you want to take a lead on it?
I was going to say that's perfect for Kevin.
Yeah.
So I think it becomes harder. So there are various platforms out there, and again, I can't name particular platforms. It's a request, so I can't give preference. But there are platforms that provide you data and insights, but it's never going to be as good as what you get from the actual retail partners. So for some of the retail partners, if they're not yet at a level that they feel comfortable with sharing data, or they don't have the functionality yet built into the platform, I think you just have to respect that and use, I guess, general rules, so trends. So as I said, if you know the average conversion rate is 15% through you know, particular retail chains, and they open up a new brand, you can apply that general rule of thumb. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, but when you look at the decline of cookies, and you look at the amount of people blocking Google Analytics, your data is never going to be perfect anyway. So I think it's very much, Avinash is very much a proponent of this, of not looking at very specific numbers, but looking at general trends over time. So if your conversion rates are increasing on a particular platform, that's great. What are you doing on that platform you're not doing on other platforms? Whether it's responding to consumer reviews, whether it's updating your images, it's whether it's running you know, particular promotions or sales. Yeah, I would say look for the general trends, because even if you use third-party data through some of these platforms, they're also guessing. You know, they're trying to you know, stitch things together to give you an answer, and sometimes that data won't actually match with the retail data. So yeah, look at trends. You're never going to get a perfect picture.
Kevin, do you have something to add?
Yeah, sure. So I think that with respect to both the outside-in data that we can get for all of these platforms, which is usually scraped, so not that reliable, and like David mentioned, it's a guesstimate of what's actually going on. I do have some, well, I wouldn't say concerns, privacy concerns, but there is a lot of data sharing going on. And not in a direct sense, but there's so much information that can be deduced from how you can render campaigns, how you can leverage those walled gardens ecosystems, which become available to you. where you can deduce what life moments people are having, or what kind of products they're currently in, if they're grieving over the loss of someone, or whatever topic that might arise, because you have access to what they're purchasing on such a broad level. So with platforms like Google, we never had the opportunity, or at least recently, to really go in and say, okay, someone is in market because they have given signal A, B, and C. We only got the result of those signals. But with these marketplaces, or retailers becoming marketplaces or sharing their data, we can really pinpoint the direct signals that people are giving, whether it's in searching for certain keywords, or that they're like their purchase behavior that you can buy into. So I guess I am concerned, looking at the great opportunity that gives us as marketeers to be very specific without having cookies, and without individual tracking. On the other side, it is concerning that data is becoming available for a wider audience to be used, and not everyone has a clear conscience in using that data. So I'm a little bit concerned of people possibly abusing that, especially when it comes to not just sponsored product kind of advertising, but more wider brand or direct messaging advertising opportunities that are out there.
Got it. Okay. We're coming up on toward the end of our session here before we open it up to questions for the audience. So I'm going to ask each of you maybe one last question, and this is sort of our Ask the Expert moment of our talk today. So, David, we'll start with you. What's one piece of advice or guidance that you could offer to another brand just starting out their e-commerce journey based on your experience? What are the things that you've learned along the way, and what's a nugget of information that, had you known it at the onset, it would have made that growth path easier for you and the Reckitt brands?
So the examples I give are non-Reckitt examples for record, but it's very much looking at the conversion points. So over the years I've worked with various brands, various websites, both in-house and agency, and I see a lot of brands buying traffic for the sake of buying traffic. So if you're an emerging brand, focus on what makes you money. Don't just buy traffic for the sake of appeasing your traffic overlords. So I think that's the biggest thing. Focus on your ROAS first, and then scale it from there. I saw another friend who had a retail site where they had 5,000 products that are advertised Google Shopping. There were only 3 products that actually sold and made money for them. So it was like, well, why are you advertising the other 4,997 products? Like, oh, because we got told by another agency we should have as much product available as possible. So yeah, so I think emerging brands or new brands, focus on what makes you money, and also I guess go back to the ethical aspect. Most research points out to ethical companies make more money in the long term. So don't take shortcuts. Don't buy crappy lists off email brokers that they've scraped off the web. Don't do unethical marketing to kind of get that growth hack. Start off ethically, start off slowly, focus on making money, and then scale it from there.
That's great advice. Patrik, how about you? What's one learning that you can share with the group from your journey into e-commerce?
Yeah, thank you. I was just digesting what David said. I think it resonated really well with me. It's I think of 3 things. One is test small and do not build first. I think especially in big companies, this is an important thing to look out for. And then when you scale, never stop experimenting, and always let the data lead you, rather than start to make assumptions and become too static. And then I think the third thing that I've observed is that let's respect that moving into a new channel or a new business might require new capabilities. It might not just work to execute Amazon as you executed a traditional retailer, or it might not work executing D2C just because you had a website before. So I think respect the need for evolving the capabilities and keep on learning on that journey.
Great advice. Kevin, how about yourself?
I think this is becoming a nice follow-up to each other, because I can't agree more with what Patrik said. And what's really my key takeaway is that when you're exploring new e-commerce opportunities or the changing e-commerce world, you shouldn't mix efficiency and effectiveness together. Especially when you grow a larger brand, you're on an enterprise level as a brand, you're always looking for efficiency. But learning new channels, testing them, exploring new opportunities takes effectiveness, and those two don't mix. So when you need new capabilities, or when you have processes that are working for you, for example, because you're a more retail-oriented organization and you want to move into D2C, be ready to test new things and let go of the current processes that you have to be more effective in what you do, instead of trying to be efficient from day one. And it also goes towards testing. Test as many new things as you want to, but keep focus on doing one thing at a time, seeing if that works. And if it does, hand it over to a team that's going to make it more efficient, and you go back to being effective with trying new things. That would be my one big learning to share.
I love that. Start with effectiveness and finish with efficiency. Let's turn it over to our audience. We have time for a couple of questions if we've got some in the chat box. Go ahead and put them in there if you'd like.
Or just yell them out.
Or yell them out. Yeah, that's fine
Yeah,
too.
that works.
We have a quiet group here today. Maybe we don't have any questions. You guys have answered all of their questions for the future.
Well, I just want to add one thing, and I'm not sure if I've sort of touched on it, but the COVID aspect, I think that supercharged a lot of search. So I think it is slowing down for some retailers as they open up more stores and they allow sort of various things, but it's also supercharged a lot of the functionality that consumers now expect. So if you don't have click and collect, or you don't have some type of guidance as to what products you have available, consumers are going to look somewhere else. So yeah, so I think COVID has definitely supercharged e-commerce, and I think it's empowered the experience for a lot of consumers.
Got it. Great. Well, any questions from our audience?
I was just trying to fill in some airtime as well.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Um,
If not, I think we'll let our panelists go a minute or two. Oh, here comes one. Here we come. This one's from Lisa. So what opportunities are there for e-commerce consultancies? So Kevin, why don't you weigh in on this one?
Oh, that's a big and broad question. Depending on what angle you want to play with the question, for me, what really is important when looking at what's happening in e-commerce in general and finding a way forward is the change in consumer behavior and how we can capture that better. So looking at the intent behind how consumers are doing their searches, whether they are looking for a direct purchase, and basically to what David just said as well, COVID supercharged a lot of things, but also changed a lot of behavior. So this has changed behavior in consumers, but it's also changing the way that brands and companies operate, right? So both internally and externally. So when it comes to e-commerce consultancy in general, it's really more of a don't go into one direction kind of thing, but it's a lot of smaller things to be fixed in parallel to each other instead of in sequence. So I think that's a big opportunity, and finding the right balance or finding the right SWOT analysis, if you will, to prioritize all of those directions that you can go at. That's, I think, the biggest challenge, but also opportunity when it comes to e-commerce consultancy. I hope that kind of answers your question.
I'm happy to add on that from the, if you like, the brand side of that. So I think picking up the point I made on that there might be a need for new capabilities when you move into new channels and new business models. I think it's super important to understand what it is the brand need help with. Is it to outsource a certain capability, or is it to to train a certain capability and then team up and do this over time?
I think there was a quick follow-up on the direction that would be recommended. It really depends on the situation, but going in a hybrid model, if you were coming from retail, to be both retail or vendor heavy, if you will, and also finding a way to reach your consumers directly, whether that's in direct purchase and fulfillment yourself or with a partner. That feels like a no-brainer to put out there. But if there's a more specific situation, I think we have to catch up on LinkedIn after.
I think one thing I want to add in here, it's very much you want to be specialist. So I've got friends that run agencies, which obviously I won't mention because I'll get disconnected from the call, but they focus on platforms. So I think there is opportunities around e-commerce consultancies, but you don't want to be a generalist because, again, you're going to be fighting with all the other digital agencies who say, oh, yeah, we've also, we've got some Amazon things we did a couple of years ago or 10 years ago. You have agencies like DEPT, which obviously have Factory A, you have specialties. But again, I think that is the, your competitive advantage is you want to be really good at something. If it's conversion rate optimization, if it's payment gateways, if it's, Shopify, WordPress, WooCommerce, you want to massively focus down on that. Again, it could be, Amazon ads, or it could be Amazon brand pages. That's your biggest opportunity to focus and do something amazing. Don't try and do everything.
Yeah. And then also something that you can carry. So, David, I think you mentioned all in the beginning, depending on the maturity that you have digitally, don't try to build yourself a Rolls Royce if you can get by a VW Polo at the moment. Don't overstretch yourself.
That's a good point, Kevin. That's one I've experienced in my time consulting brands as well. We have another question from the audience. This one comes from Dominic. And I think actually, David, it touches to the point that you're making, recommending kind of to have a specialty. So he says, he's asking, how do we see search in 2023 and beyond? And especially within CPG, with regards to Performance Max and shopping on Google. Are you starting to see an emergent role of automation, and how does that impact, what the role of specialists, especially in the search space?
So the one thing is, with a lot of Google's new ad formats, you have less control, you have less oversight on sort of what's actually happening. So it becomes more of a black box. You give them money, they drive you traffic, they drive you sales. So I think it makes sense to balance the spending. If you're looking across the consumer value journey, so it doesn't make sense to spend all your budget at the top part of the funnel when consumers are still shopping around. They're not really sure what product they're interested in. But again, it may not be always cost effective to focus at the bottom part of the funnel, and you're competing against 15, 20 other retail partners for that same click. So I think it's very much kind of, you need to balance it. You need to measure what's actually working for you, because what you think might work for your particular brand or business may not actually occur. You could find out that if you did Bing ads, they might be significantly cheaper than Google ads in your market. So you want to be always, as Patrik said, always want to be testing. Just because something works for one of your brands or one of your markets doesn't mean it's going to work in all of them. I think automation is fine, but you need to balance between automation and having full control of negative keywords, time of day, placement, ad copy. You need to balance the two, but Google is moving more towards the fully automated option.
And that's a really good point about, what you assume is going to work versus what's not going to work. And to the point you made about kind of COVID changing a lot of consumer behavior and accelerating the capabilities in the space, we're sort of seeing the reverse of that now with a lot of brands that had really strong success over 2020 and 2021. Now they're starting to struggle a little bit, having to reframe their strategies and their approaches.
And to add one thing here,
yeah,
I think that looking at how search is evolving and where Google is fully going down the automated gray/black box model when it comes to advertising, which is not a bad thing, right? So in some cases, it's very good that they're taking care of a lot of the mundane work that had to be done in the past. But looking at product search specifically, in a lot of markets, over half of searches are already not taking place on Google when it comes to product searches. They're on platforms like Amazon or Bol.com in the Netherlands, if you will, or all these niche players. So those still offer that granularity of control when it comes to buying direct intent, so a direct query, for example. So I do feel that even though Google is really spearheading automation in a gray box model, that you still have ample opportunity to leverage your SEO and SEA knowledge on other platforms that are, well, to my point earlier, are just like search engines, but they're just not as far ahead as Google is.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Well, if we don't have any more questions in the chat, I think it's time to thank our panelists today. So Kevin, Patrik, and David, thank you so much for joining us here at DEPT Commerce Day. We really appreciated your expert advice and perspective on what it takes to future-proof your e-commerce and grow and scale.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
so
having us.
much.
Have a good Commerce Day.
Bye.
Good day. Bye.